Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody that is hopefully for somebody. My name is Cal Naranya, and welcome to episode 133 of the Film Realist Podcast. On this week's episode, I'm going to be reviewing Mickey 17, giving my reaction to Deli Boys, which is now available on Disney+, and then, of course, responding to listener mail and question of the week responses. Time codes will be listed for each parts of the episode, so there will be a non-spoiler Mickey 17 review and then a spoiler review. So if you haven't had a chance yet to see the film, there's no need to worry. You can hop around if you would like. Let's not waste any time and jump into Robert Pattinson's Mickey 17.
On Earth, nothing was working out, and I wanted to get the hell out of there.
You're applying to be an expendable? You read through the paperwork.
Yeah. I should have read through it.
Mickey 17 is, of course, the next directorial film from Bong Joon-ho, the Academy Award-winning director from Parasite, one of my personal favorite films of all time with Snowpiercer. And Mickey 17 is really interesting. Of course, the film markets itself with the clones of Robert Pattinson. He's an expendable, no, not one of the Sylvester Stallone ones, in that his DNA is registered and he is put in the dirty jobs, and somebody has to do them. In this instance, it being Mickey Barnes, played by Robert Pattinson. What I appreciated most from Robert Pattinson in this film in particular is, for such a long time, and you can go back all the way to the Batman casting, whenever that was, it feels like 1,000 years ago, probably 2021 or 2020, whenever that was announced, people reacted to, oh, the Twilight guy. And I don't need people to remind me, go back through the history of casting for Batman. Every single time people have reacted negatively or have gone, who? And just go back, it's pretty much how that works. And Robert Pattinson, what I love about his career is obviously he made bank off of the Twilight films, but that allowed him to pursue his career with art-driven films and allowed him to stretch different parts of his personality on the screen, in that he used different skills for each of the different films, whether that be a romantic comedy, a heavy drama, an action blockbuster like Tenet, or doing something that is completely more performance-based like Good Times, where he clearly shows he has such a phenomenal amount of range. And Mickey 17 does something that we haven't really seen from him maybe ever, which is leaning into a more comedic role, but still allowing there to be depth within that. Mickey Barnes, as this expendable, is somebody who's on the run and doesn't really seem to appreciate the fact that his deaths mean nothing, but a character with little confidence being put in that situation, particularly in a society where they are traveling to the next place, and what somebody goes through in remembering all their deaths, because that's an interesting aspect, which is he is a duplicate. This isn't just, oh, we made a bunch of Mickeys. Every time one gets killed, another one gets brought back. And obviously there's a mistake at some point giving us the clones that we do see in the trailer. And that's the selling point. Oh, look, there's two Robert Pattinsons. The best way that I would sell this movie, and I saw this with Chris, is this really did remind me of an anime you probably would have seen in the late 80s and early 90s, where a lot of the times what's so successful about manga and anime is there are some exploration of what is going on within the political environment or societally or economically to some degree as well. And that's where science fiction does such a great job of showing the future, but reflecting problems of the day. And those are definitely elements that are in this film, from an exploration of the separation of wealth or societal's expectations, or quite literally the caste system, if you want to go into a specific point of view, or what Snowpiercer does with 1984 on a train, and building in a world where people are believing in all of these things that are coming from, whether that be a religion or some sort of government, are all elements that are included in this film. And unfortunately, while I did really like the movie, and Robert Pattinson in particular, having the duality in the performance allows him to show a lot of the skills that he has accrued over time in his career. Once the clones are introduced, outside of a couple really interesting shots, that dynamic doesn't become the focus of the film anymore. It sort of gets moved to the side and dealing with the actual main crux of the film for the back half, which is a little frustrating because there have been so many films, and we will get to them in question of the week responses, where the whole concept of a twin or a clone are entrenched in what the story they're trying to tell is. And the gimmick of Robert Pattinson being more than one person just getting shoved to the side was really interesting. I don't think that, obviously the bar was set incredibly high with something like Parasite, but Bong Joon-ho's grasp on the structure of this movie and the more nitty-gritty details sort of get lost, which is unfortunate. I had a really fun time with this movie. I think it's wildly entertaining, and the dynamic of what's going on, particularly with this spaceship and where they're going, is a great mirror for what is happening in the world today, specifically United States, and quite frankly, the buffoons who have been given power, whether that be within the Senate, Congress, or the President of the United States. And a lot of that reflection of government officials and the lunacy to which they are leading groups of people, whether that be the people who voted for them or within their own political party, is not handled with the precision and skill of something like Parasite and Snowpiercer, particularly with Mickey 17 and 18 in the movie with Robert Pattinson, focusing on that dynamic of somebody who is kind of behind what's going on in the world and doesn't see the larger problems, just wants to be a cog in the machine. That sort of gets left behind in the movie, and it becomes more about this grander thing. And I like the really wild exploration of the world that this movie does have, particularly where it is understandable and you can see a lot of the futuristic elements as part of it, feeling as if it's something that could be achieved. But at the same time, and we see glimpses of them in the trailer, where the creature design and the world building feeling Akira-esque or from that manga influence, where it is tangible and we understand how all of these things work. Not everything works the first time. A lot of this does feel like a grittier version of science fiction where not everything is clean. People are just lucky to have gotten to the spaceship, and all of the interpersonal dynamics that they have with the fact that they're on this long journey and arc across to go to the new place where they are going. There's a lot in the movie that is failed to be explored. So if the expectations and the bars for a film that Bong Joon-ho has directed, like Parasite, like Snowpiercer, I don't think this film manages to reach the heights of those. I had a really entertaining time with this. The movie's not overly long. It's just over 2 hours, with it being 137 minutes. I would have really appreciated more of an exploration of the dynamic of the multiples, which is when we have the two instances of Robert Pattinson in that world, and getting to see more of the other people. For having such an extensive amount of extras in the film, there aren't very many main characters, and there's a relationship introduced that seemed like it was going to be a hurdle for Mickey's relationships with Naomi Aki's character, but it sort of just gets pushed to the side, which was a little disappointing, because because of limited people, interpersonal dynamics, whether that be a throuple or any polyamorous relationship, it seems to tease these things, but then the movie decides to completely shift the focus into something else. And if the film were allowed to be longer, and what's most interesting is this film was supposed to come out in January and then eventually got pushed to March, which I'm not sure if that was because of editing choices or reshoots there. I hadn't looked into this, so I'm not necessarily sure. So there was a lot to be desired in this film, and a lot of the offerings that we do get are entertaining. I was laughing at a lot of the physicality we get from Robert Pattinson in this, particularly with all the different Mickeys. And that's a skill and a tool that we've not seen from him in any of his real performances. I mean, The Lighthouse is kind of zany to some degree, but this is much more slapstick than we've seen from Robert Pattinson before. And that lack of focus, if you were given more time to explore a little more of the relationships in the movie, funneling into what winds up being in the conclusion, would have worked a lot better if we had more time with everybody else, as opposed to couple characters that sort of just pop in here and there. And the relationships that they have with Naomi Aki, Steven Yeun's character, that being another sort of loosely established relationship. We get to see some of it in flashbacks, but how they necessarily go off of each other. It just doesn't seem to establish exactly why Mickey is the way he is. We get little pieces of that when he is talking to himself, but unfortunately, I think it fails to be as thoroughly entertaining and as thoroughly interesting movie with something to say as opposed to Bong Joon-ho's earlier movies, which is a little disappointing. I was expecting to really, really like this, and I laughed a lot, but compared to his other work, I don't feel that I'm going to be thinking about it as much, just because some of the farcical nature to which it was portraying some real world people in power now doesn't necessarily work the whole time, and that's a little disappointing. So let's jump into spoilers, and I can explain a lot of this a lot more thoroughly, particularly when the pivot in the plot didn't work for me.
Are you afraid to die?
Kinda, yeah.
You died plenty of times. What are you so scared of?
Until now, I died and I was just born again, you know? It felt like it was me continuing on. But now, once I die, it'll be over.
So Mickey Barnes is somebody who started a macaroon shop with Steven Yeun, and they, unfortunately, not necessarily shocking, they aren't able to make any money because macaroons they're a delicacy that, quite frankly, I couldn't even tell you the last time I bought a macaroon. And in the future, why? Why are you making macaroons? Explain this to me, Mickey Barnes. And they have to flee because real world things, and this is where a lot of those elements come in, which is the world is falling apart. A lot of politicians and rich people have built these arcs or ships, and they are moving space colonies onto other planets. This being the last one, Mickey needing to know that he for certain is going to get off of the planet, he then signs up to be an expendable. So he gives them his genetic material. Every single time he is cloned, he is given his memory, so he remembers every single thing, and he's connected to essentially the cloud, where he can learn from his mistakes and be put in these horrible situations. And a lot of the comedy does come from that. How is Mickey going to die in there? And I love seeing this from Robert Pattinson. He's hilarious in this movie, and the meek nature to which Mickey 17 is really interesting, in his relationship with Naomi Oki, who winds up being his lover on the ship, and they talk about, with limited calories for everybody to survive their 4.5-year trip, that any unnecessary exercise is completely not allowed. Although, of course, you put people in a confined space, adults have needs, these things are going to happen. I don't believe we see if anybody's actually pregnant on the ship, but that comes to what I said in this non-spoiler part of the review, which is that we don't get to know a lot of people. This feels like an indie with a lot of money. The budget for this was $118 million, and I'm sure a lot of that came down to the effects, with all the different sci-fi elements being in space, the actual ship set extensions, the alien creatures, which I'll get to very momentarily, but also, of course, the twin shots in this. And there's a lot of incredible ones in the movie. But what's funny is, as soon as Mickey 18 is produced, we get a chunk in the middle with a lot of incredible clone or twin interacting shots, and then they just sort of wind up being next to each other for the remainder of the movie, which no longer is fascinating because that becomes photography we've seen in films before. But the whole dynamic between the two Mickeys is something that I really wish we explored even more, which is Mickey 17 is a much more meek person, and that personality seems to stay throughout most of the clones as he is reproduced. And then Mickey 18, for whatever reason, is a much more hardened, upset, angry person with what is going on, particularly with Mark Ruffalo, who is Kenneth Marshall, this politician who failed when he was in I'm assuming the United States, and eventually got connected with some sort of church, who is then in charge of this expedition for the space colony. And it's a very obvious Trump impersonation. I mean, you can pick really any ludicrous sounding Republican to put them in charge of this, and you could understand exactly what they're going for with this performance. And there's a level of this where, unfortunately, and this is unfortunate to remove, I know I just said unfortunate twice, which is that watching some absurdity reflection of the real world, and why science fiction has often been able to do this, which is be a mirror for our norms of the present, but putting them into a science fiction based reality, is that having somebody this ludicrously stupid who is constantly being told what to do by Toni Collette, who is playing a more conniving version of what we saw from her in something like Knives Out, which is she's somewhat brilliant, but also really stupid and quite weird. She has this really weird hobby where she likes to make sauces for meats out of living things. She cuts the tail off of one of the creatures that are called creepers in the movie and then blends it in like a magic bullet to make a sauce, it was absolutely disgusting. And some of the comedic comes out of that she's obsessed with sauces, where their dynamic as the leaders. It's funny to me that everybody on the ship seems for the most part to be a super fan of the Marshals, but never sees the need to mutiny or overturn the people who are in power. It just seems like everybody's happy to be stuck on this thing for 4.5 years. And you would think, based on what's going on in the real world, that if you were stuck with somebody insane for 4 years, maybe you wouldn't want to do that. I don't know. Maybe I'm just projecting. And Mickey's life as we see it through the first half, just his experience with being the expendable and the two people he's met. And this is where one of the things I brought up earlier, which is Anna Maria Vartolomei plays Kai, who's somebody who goes on an expedition with Mickey 17, and their partner is killed. And there seems to be some sort of romantic interest in Mickey 17. Again, there's a ship of, we're not sure how many people are actually on this, but the dynamics seem to be, quite frankly, a little prison-based, where you get your meal every day of certain amount of calories. You get your 3 square meals, but that's it. There's no treats outside of the fact that every day one person has a decadent meal with the Marshals in the evening for dinner. And when we get to the 2 clones of Mickey, that's where I thought it would be really interesting to see how the different personalities would interact with the people that know Mickey 17, as well as the fact that they don't know there's a Mickey 18. Going with that back and forth like some other movies have done, where the clones or personalities are actually quite different from each other. And how does that affect the relationships, where the cat out of the bag that there winds up being 2 of them, or as they're discussed as multiples in this movie, is revealed quite quickly, which I found interesting because it doesn't give you the opportunity to play with the different interpersonal dynamics of the 2 personalities. And whether that's you didn't want to do it, maybe you didn't have time, or it was not something that Bong Joon-ho was interested in doing, I found that particularly interesting because it would also substantially lower the cost of having scenes where the 2 clones have to be side by side or interacting. And of course, you're going to be doing that with head replacement as well as body doubles. We've seen a lot of incredible twins, something like the Winklevosses in The Social Network or some other films that I'm sure will come up in the question of the week responses. And the societal expectations when they get to the planet really start to change because of these aliens called creatures, where they are concerned about landing on this planet, thinking that these are a hostile race. And we learn through Mickey 17's interactions with them that they are almost essentially a hive mind and very nice and docile creatures and don't want anything to do with the humans. They just want to be left alone. And they even bring Mickey back to the colony so that he does survive. But as you would have with an unintelligible leader of a radical church, thinks they need to be exterminated. So the focus starts to become on that, about legacy for the colony and what's best for the people of, I don't actually remember if the ship has a name, but it doesn't actually matter. And so the focus to that is quite a substantial shift in the movie's plot. And the 2 clones existing with each other sort of just get forgotten after that point. They're there and they both have different things that they want to do, which is mainly that the conflict between the 2 of them is that only one of them can exist because of the philosophical laws based on the whole idea of cloning twins and the person who actually founded it. And this is one of the most interesting parts of the movie that I'm just getting to now, which is the person who created this cloning machine was actually using it using duplicates, or as they call multiples, to be a serial killer and have legal alibis as to why it couldn't be him who was doing it, which is why this technology is allowed to be used in space, because it's off Earth and there will only ever be one person made at a time. Talking about the whole idea of soul in one person can't be duplicated and the religious implications of that. But that's it. The movie shows it for a scene, and then we have Mickey 17 freaking out and Mickey 18 freaking out because they know they're multiples, that they're going to be wiped out. And they don't really. That winds up being part of the last little bit of the climax. But the philosophical expectations or ramifications of that don't really come up. And it could when even Kai suggests the fact that she's like, I'm interested in Mickey 17, and then you can have Mickey 18. But that interpersonal dynamic is just kind of pushed to the side, and we don't really see much of Kai after that. We do get more of Steven Yeun's Timo character, where it turns out, of course, the loan shark has somebody on the planet, on the spaceship, and that they're going to be killed if one of them isn't killed because of all the money that they owe him. This side story really does feel like the C plot, just to add conflict to move the story along. There doesn't seem to be a grand plot. You would think it would be the whole idea of the two multiples, but it just seems like pieces of a short stories just sort of being tacked onto each other, which did hurt the overall exploration of this society and what all the ramifications of all the different science and religious undertones that the movie's trying to address, which just aren't as intelligible as we'd had in his other movies. Specifically that being, of course, Snowpiercer and Parasite. Snowpiercer being a movie where the increase in financials or the success of the rich moved horizontally along the train. And then, of course, with Parasite, we had a more vertical story set up. And that's kind of where the movie falls apart, unfortunately, when we start to focus on the colonization and these creatures or creepers that Mickey is somehow able to communicate with in this genocide that Marshall is planning, so he can be this historical leader for the church. Although they're not there, you're there by themselves, but they do have people who represent them on the spaceship. And then that winds up being the conflict where they want to save all of the creatures, this sort of hive mind that they do have. And the climax just sort of seems to happen very quickly. We have a translator. We're going to talk to the queen of the hive mind. You need to give us the baby that they took from us. And then we are owed a person because one of our creeper infants was killed. And the sacrifice for that being Mickey 18 sacrifices himself to kill Marshall. This then being the indication to the rest of the people of this spaceship, maybe we should have a democratic leader system as opposed to just some random dude being in charge of us, the politician who was running the things before being Mark Ruffalo's character of Kenneth Marshall. So the first half of the movie I really loved, and I love the absurd nature of this story, but there does seem to be a lack of focus, which prevents it from stacking up with Bong Joon-ho's other films. So unfortunately, I'm left feeling a little mixed. There's some great things in here. I love the special effects. Robert Pattinson was really great, but some of the performances, particularly with the politicians and the church, are just a little too comical for, I think, the tone that this film is trying to capture. So it was entertaining and it was fun. It's not going to be one of the movies that sticks with me like Bong Joon-ho's other work, which is unfortunate, but they're not all going to be winners, and that's okay. Now let's move into my feelings on Deli Boys.
We could go to jail.
We're innocent.
Right. We'd be the first innocent brown people in jail. Oh my God.
Last week, I posted my review of Deli Boys, but this being the audio form, I can get into it more. I watched all of season 1 prior to its release on March 6th, and let's get into it. It is, as I said in that, it is Kim's Convenience meets Narcos. It gives a very mundane setting with an absurd amount of chaos, that being involved with a drug cartel in it. And what makes this so funny is you take a lot of cultural expectations and norms within a Pakistani family, and then the absurdity of trying to work with your aunts and uncles, grandparents, brothers and sisters in trying to maintain a drug empire when you are not somebody who is used to being on that side of the tracks. Asif Ali as Mir being that person who was the younger brother, the workhorse who wanted to become successful, impress his dad, and eventually take over. And then you have Sagir Shaki, who played Raj, who is familiar to a lot of people from Miss Marvel. He played Amir Khan in that show. And I really appreciate that his next project is the complete antithesis of what we saw from him in Miss Marvel, which is in this, he enjoys drugs, parties, he doesn't really care, and he is certainly a much more mild character than we had as the overachiever, which he was in Miss Marvel. And the dynamic between the two brothers has to work for this show to work, because their reactions to the extreme events that they participate in has to work for all of the comedy in the show to work, and it certainly does. One thing I was a little shocked by, which is 10 episodes of about half an hour each. The pilot in particular feels like it should be an hour long, where of course the escalation is quite rapid in setting everything up and then giving us the tragic passing away of Raj and Mir's dad. We find out later, and spoilers for Deli Boys, that it was an actual hit from this golfer who is that good. Absolutely incredible that you can kill somebody with golf balls. That's next level, and you should be a comic book villain or something. I don't know what we would call you, but I will think about that and maybe I'll come up with it later. And their relationship with Lucky, who is their adopted aunt, and she's the cold-blooded killer who needs everything done, and she takes control but needs the boys because of, as you have within family dynamics, people vying for their own goals. I don't really like what you're doing with that. And we get Ahmad, played by Brian George, who is striving to be the head of the family of Darko, but him and Lucky need the boys because the other people who are involved with this don't see them as a viable option either. And all of those conversations are really funny because they seem so small scale. And then you realize, oh, we have the Peruvians who are giving us all these drugs, which we need to sell so that way we can pay the Peruvians. And then as the world unfolds, things just become more and more extreme. And a lot of the humor does come from that. I found it really funny, but some of the character arcs, particularly that with Mir and Raj does work where he sees the escalation of everything happening around him and was just trying to survive, but no longer sees that as a viable option for his life because of all of the things he's having to do that negatively affect the people that he loves. That being with Prairie, because of where she gets involved with the feds and ultimately has to go on the run, where Amir's shift into being kind of the Michael Corleone of this works in the finale, but I feel like because the show is going for that sitcom length with drama, some of those pieces that build to that finale aren't all there. The escalation feels slightly drastic, which is okay. I think for the most part, it would work for people where you're not looking for all of those decisions. And I like that we do have that dynamic. If this was just one child from Darko, it wouldn't work. But because you have that dynamic of the two of them butting heads because of the way that they've chosen to tackle their lives, that makes the drama much more compelling because you have automatically two different perspectives on what's going on and seeing the absurdity and the horrible, terrible things that they're having to do to achieve success. So all of that stuff does work. I did mention in my review, and I'm going to mention it here, that some of the pacing doesn't hold for me, but ultimately the show is wild. It's crazy, but it is so funny because you have people so outside of this underworld experiencing all of these horrible things and acting as if they are the eyes and ears for the audience in experiencing these crazy and terrible things. So I'm looking forward to season 2. I would like to see where Mir goes, what happens when Raj is not in his life anymore. I'm not sure what the success is in viewing numbers for this, but I definitely would check out Deli Boys. And if you're somebody who liked the small scale of Kim's Convenience or Schitt's Creek, and then the crazy drug cartel trafficking of Narcos, Pablo Escobar, all that kind of stuff, imagine the absurdity of mixing those two shows together, and that's what you get with Deli Boys. So I would totally recommend checking it out. It's on Disney Plus in Canada and Hulu in the United States. So that will do it for my Deli Boys review. Now let's jump into question of the week responses and listener mail.
Can I ask you a question? Just fun?
There's something I've been meaning to ask you.
I ask the questions, you answer the questions.
Why do you ask questions to which you already know the answers?
Did that count as a question?
Yes.
Damn it.
This goes to 2 or 3 weeks ago question of the week. So Jet Enigma said, most looking forward to Fantastic Four, The First Steps, but Thunderbolts looks great too. Then we have Scotty Cameron, who responded to Question of the Week. And the question was, what is your favorite movie with twins? Scotty Cameron says, my favorite film with twins is The Prestige. It is one of the Christopher Nolan's most underappreciated films and a brilliant allegory to Tesla versus Edison. That's all I'll say to avoid spoiling the film. Thank you very much. Dylan Pollock of Movies to Watch Before You Die says, big man doing big man things, LOL. Can't wait to watch. Also, definitely catch up on My Adventures with Superman. It rules. Favorite twins movie? That's an interesting question. Obvious answer says The Shining, but I'll throw The Matrix and Social Network in there too. And then says, can't wait for the Daredevil review. Then we got a bunch of stuff here from Scotty Cameron. My goodness. I don't mind. So this was a question I had for Scotty. I don't mind when new editions of books features art or actors from adaptations of the novels because it can attract fans of those adaptations, particularly with the Reacher novels because the cover art is just the title of the book in popping font. I own copies of Enemy, The Secret, and Die Trying, my favorite Reacher novel, and their covers aren't that interesting. So covers for The Persuader, Killing Floor, and Bad Luck and Trouble featuring Alan Ritchson are actually more visually interesting than their standard covers, much like how the covers for One Shot and Never Go Back featured Tom Cruise are more visually interesting. Okay, Dylan, you wrote a lot here, so Scotty, I'm just going to jump ahead as you said I could, which is great. Thank you very much. I can get carried away when I find something I can enjoy discussing. If you want to read any of this live, really most of the second paragraph can be condensed to the Brant Russo assault. I got carried away after mentioning the Finlay wasn't in Bad Luck Trouble and Neely wasn't in Killing Floor and The Persuader. The first paragraph was a response to the question you raised about adaptations that can take over as novels covers. So I also wanted to give my input on that, and I appreciate that. Dylan's reasoning behind liking Reacher prompted me to draw comparisons between the show and the novels. My question of the week answer is going to be relatively short, and yes, I did read that already. Sparago Castano says, an oldie but a goodie with twins. Gaming Smith H5Z says, probably The Flash. I don't know if that's twins, though, because it's different realities, and I would say it definitely counts. There's multiple versions of Barry within that show. Melinda with some snake emojis and a trans flag says, The Parent Trap with Lindsay Lohan, which was awesome. Now, before you listen to this portion of the episode, spoilers for Daredevil, because these are comments on my bonus Daredevil episode. So if you don't want to hear those, just jump out. No need to worry. We will read those and then you can find out. Just jump probably like 2 minutes forward, if not less than that. Scotty Cameron. Great episode. I enjoyed the first 2 episodes despite killing Foggy off in the opening scene of episode 1. Still a great show. I do wish I had watched it before seeing the Invincible War episode because that dominated my mind today. Brit, Best Tiger, El Chupacabra, Cast Iron, Wolfman Bolt, and Tech Jacket all appear in that episode to answer the call. Then the Conquest Sting. Not even the new Reacher tops that. I'm so glad you're liking Invincible so far, Scotty Cameron, but I have to say, somebody asked me about this recently, and I found this season to be kind of directionless. Maybe I'll feel differently after we get the remaining 3, but so far it has been so all over the place, and I'm excited for Conquest because that's going to be a really great fight with the Viltrumites, but man, it's been all over the place for me so far. Dylan said, super disappointing to have Foggy back just to kill him off. Not sure if it's because Karen and Foggy knew too much and they didn't know what to do with them from there since you replace them with similar characters. Maybe it's super important Matt has a relationship with Fisk's marriage counselor later on, but I can't help feeling there would have been a way to have them both. Foggy gets shot and blames Matt or something like that. I understand people not liking what happened with Foggy in the episode, and I didn't really make a video about this, but I guess I'll do this now, which is I understand not liking when certain things happen in the story, but from what happens in episode 1 of Daredevil and what that puts Matt through dealing with his religious expectations and what he's grown up with, it puts him in a really interesting spot that we have failed to see from him before. Of course, you can have that dynamic with a choice that he makes, but given the gravity of the choice that he does make after that does happen, I think it is a really interesting story to see from Matt. So I get it. I love that actor and that character, but once you've seen the whole season, I'll be curious to see if people's minds change because of that. And I'm one of the fortunate ones who has seen all of season 1 of Daredevil Born Again. All right, what else do we have here? Legacy Odinson, first time comment. Hi, Legacy. Truly, I'm feeling more enthralled and invested in the story than I ever have been for a Marvel series in some time. And this is coming from someone that, generally speaking, liked all of the shows I've seen, even the middling ones. Feels like a real return to form of Daredevil. Totally agree. And I'll be really curious as the weeks unfold. And when you're listening to this, episode 3 comes out tomorrow. And I adored episode 3. It might be one of my favorite episodes of the season. Keen Machine. Hello, Keen. Hello. Here's my answer to last week's question of the week. My favorite movie with twins is definitely Batman Beyond Return of the Joker. However, assuming you want a movie that is focused on a pair of twins, I am a simple product of the 90s Parent Trap. Oh, here we go. With remake, Lindsay Lohan has to be a winner for me. I absolutely floored as a child when I discovered the twins were played by the same actress. It's just such an iconic movie. Agreed. I totally agree with that. It was something that I was not aware of when I watched it, which is saying something. Thank you so much to everybody who responded to Question of the Week. As always, if you didn't watch the thing that the Question of the Week is addressing, you can always send me a question and I will answer your Question of the Week. So no need to worry if maybe it doesn't pertain to you specifically. And as I am looking at the calendar, I have 2 things that are going to be a part of the episode, which is interesting to me, but I've done this ahead of time, so I shouldn't be surprised, which is next week, I'm going to react to The Electric State, which has not been getting good reviews. And Scotty, I know you'll love this, Invincible Season 3. So I really hope with the final episode, which I did not think we were getting already. I thought for some reason this was going to be 10. I don't know why I expected 10 when every season has been 8 episodes, but man, do I hope episode 8 wraps that story up. So that's what you can look forward to on next week's episode. This week's question of the week is pertaining to The Electric State. What is your favorite Netflix original film? They have made so many different things. I'm really curious to seeing what people have to say about that. So to let me know, you can email the podcast, you can comment directly on YouTube or Spotify or at The Film Realists, and make sure to include the hashtag QOTW, and I will check it out and respond to your answers. If you love the podcast and this is your first time listening, welcome to the show. This is pretty much it. Please consider giving the podcast a 5-star review and a follow on your preferred podcast platform. It helps the podcast grow, heard by others, and will later on help me achieve things that will allow me to make a more interesting and a more in-depth episode with more access to other forms of content, which would be amazing. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you next time.